in terms of a marketing channel, it is inherently free. So one of the things I always stress to people is that they can do PR themselves. They don't need to pay, they don't need to pay $10,000. They don't need to pay any money for this. And I think that's really important for a lot of companies who are just starting out.
Welcome to the Conversion Aid Podcast, where we help software entrepreneurs to take their business to the next level. Each week, we interview proven industry experts who share their strategies and insights to help you create software that sells. Here's your host, Omer Khan.
Hey, welcome to the Conversion Aid Podcast. In this episode, we're going to give you a crash course in PR or public relations. Now, PR can be a really cost-effective way to get great media coverage, build exposure for your business, and it can even help with search engine optimization. My guest today is a PR expert who is going to share his 5-step process that you can start using today without spending any money to get PR working for your business. Before we get into that, just a reminder about the Flow giveaway that I'm running to celebrate 100 episodes of this show. If you don't already know, Flow is the team that designed Slack, which is now valued at $2.8 billion. After not being able to find a project management app for another business that he had at the time, the founder of Flow, Andrew Wilkinson, decided to build his own product. And they've kindly given me 3 one-year licenses of their studio plan, which you can use with teams of up to 10 people. And it's worth $636 a year. Now, if you just have a team of 2 or 3 people, then after the year, you can downgrade to the starter plan for just $19 a month. I'll give you 3 reasons why I like Flow. Firstly, it has a great, clean, and simple interface to help you get an instant overview of your team's projects and what everyone is up to. It makes life really easy to keep everyone across the team up to date. Secondly, instead of using a chat tool like Slack separately to your project management software, Flow brings chat and tasks together, so you can do things like creating new tasks right from your team's chat. You get an end-to-end workflow for your team in one app. And working with remote teams is often frustrating. Flow makes that really easy for your team, no matter what country or time zone they're in, to collaborate as if everybody was together in the same room. It's a great tool and a great giveaway. So head over to conversionaid.com/giveaway to enter. If you want to improve your chances of winning, then make sure you have joined the Conversion Aid VIP list. Before you enter the giveaway, just head over to conversionaid.com/VIP because one of those licenses is reserved just for somebody on this list. And if you're already a VIP member, then you don't have to do anything. Just go ahead, enter the giveaway, and you will automatically be entered into the VIP-only draw as well. All right, so with that, let's get on with today's interview. All right, today's guest is the founder and CEO of Publicize, a startup that's aiming to change the way companies approach PR. As opposed to PR companies that charge $10,000 a month, Publicize provides a month-to-month solution starting from just $399. My guest has been featured in publications such as the Financial Times, Bloomberg, and TechCrunch, and he's also a global mentor at 500 Startups and Founder Institute. So today, I'd like to welcome Conrad Egusa. Conrad, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Omer.
Cool. Now, I like to start off by trying to figure out what gets my guests out of bed, what drives them, what motivates them. Is there a quote that resonates most with you?
I would say the quote that most resonates me was by Warren Buffett, who said it takes 20 years to build a reputation and only a few minutes to lose it. And I think especially in Silicon Valley, where I spent several years, to me, there all that matters is a person's reputation, and it's just important to to do things the right way, whether it's in business or kind of any aspect of a person's life.
Okay, so let's talk about PR. I would say let's start from the real basics, like 101. Help us understand what exactly is PR and why should somebody running a SaaS business care about it?
Yeah, I would say PR is really important for a number of reasons. I think one is in terms of a marketing channel, it is inherently free. So one of the things I always stress to people is that they can do PR themselves. They don't need to pay, they don't need to pay $10,000. They don't need to pay any money for this. And I think that's really important for a lot of companies who are just starting out. The advantages are not only in terms of new traffic and new kind of potential new revenue. I think it provides a level of social proof. If somebody's looking to learn about Publicize, if I can send a link and be able to say, hey, if you want to read about us on Forbes and TechCrunch on here, et cetera, they'll say, oh, wow, if they're strong enough to be covered on these publications, that says something about them. And I think that's a level of social proof that other marketing channels don't provide. And I think that carries over not only to clients, but to potential partners, to potential investors if they're looking to go that route. So there are a number of different benefits.
Let's say I have a SaaS business. Maybe I'm in the early stages. I'm not funded. So I'm probably maybe even paying somebody $400 a month right now. Mm-hmm. Doesn't make a lot of sense for me, or maybe I'm just not comfortable enough going down that road. Let's talk about some of the things that those people could start to do themselves. So you'd mentioned earlier about having sort of deconstructed the PR process. Tell us a little bit about that and help us sort of understand in a simpler way what that process looks like.
Absolutely. So there are basically 5 steps. And I'll use kind of an example of a SaaS business that's about to launch. And whether, again, they're looking to raise funding or whether they just want to gain a lot of new users. Let's say they say, we want to be on TechCrunch or Business Insider, and we're about to launch. The very first thing to do is to come up with a specific announcement you're going to make. So a story of this is when I was writing for VentureBeat in New York, a lot of my friends would come up to me and they would say, hey, Conrad, I know you're writing for VentureBeat. Would you be able to cover my company? And I would say, sure. What do you have to announce? And they would say, well, we don't have anything to announce. And I would say, if you don't have anything to announce, I can't write anything because there's no story there. So kind of the takeaway from this is companies, especially I think SaaS companies, will have specific milestones and announcements to make throughout their lifetime. So when they're first launching, first starting, their first announcement might be a company launch. Maybe 3 weeks later, they launch a mobile app. Maybe 3 months later, they hit a certain milestone. 3 months later, they raise $100,000 in funding. 6 months later, they raise $2 million in funding, whatever it may be. But when you're reaching out to these publications, what you shouldn't say is like, hi, my name is David. Will you cover my company? But what you should say is, hi, my name is David. My company is about to launch. Would you like to cover the announcement about the launch? Because that's the specific story that they're going to focus on. I hope that kind of makes sense, that difference there. Yeah,
no, absolutely. And I think another way to sort of think about it is when you're reading something on TechCrunch or VentureBeat or any of these sites, what's the kind of content that attracts you? What's the stuff that you're interested in reading? And inevitably, there's always some kind of story or angle behind the coverage. It's not just, here's a product.
Yeah. And I think the big thing is there are almost 2 stories involved. There's the primary story, which is the announcement, whatever that might be. That could be a milestone or funding. And the second story, kind of the secondary story, is usually a specific angle. So it could be about the founding team. It could be about like something about the market. And the second thing is identifying social proof of the team. So whether it's the founding team or the executive team. And the primary reason you want to do this is you want to show why is the team the right team to kind of fulfill the mission of this company. And as an example, if you're trying to launch a SaaS business in the language industry, it's going to help if you say, well, the 2 founders have Stanford PhDs from Stanford in linguistics, or they graduated from this business school, or they worked for this company. And that's why they're the right people to fix. And usually points of social proof come from companies worked at or universities or awards received. But it's especially with new announcements, it's important to remember that about half the story comes from comes from the company itself, and half kind of of what it makes an interesting story comes from the founding team. So another example from VentureBeat, I remember talking to my editor, and he said, "Hey, Conrad, can you cover this story?" And I said, "Yeah, what is the company about?" And he said, "Hey, it doesn't even matter. It's about Bill Gates' former assistant starting this venture." So it's like, that's what makes it interesting, is the founding team. So something to kind of keep in mind for people.
Okay, so even if somebody doesn't have a PhD, they can still sort of take those two ingredients that you talked about. One is, what's the story about your product? And that could be you're launching, or you've released a version of the product on a different platform or something like that. And then combine that with the founder story in terms of what is there about you that maybe can make this piece a little bit more interesting, maybe something about your background, or maybe the type of people that you have on the team, or whatever.
Absolutely. And
okay.
There are a lot of founders who I talk to, and they say, "Hey, my company's just not that interesting." And I usually say, well, if the company itself isn't that interesting, try to shift a lot of the angle more to the founding team, and kind of vice versa. And one of the things to mention about social proof is that there are kind of two types of social proof. The one is the kind of impressive social proof. So, hey, I graduated from Harvard. I used to work, I worked at Microsoft, kind of, okay, wow, that kind of that obvious one. One of the less obvious ones is sometimes I speak to founders, and they would say, hey, no one's ever going to cover me because I'm a 65-year-old founder in Chicago, and or I'm a 16-year-old developer. And I always say, well, you don't understand. That's the exact reason why they will cover you, because there are not that many. Yeah, there are not that many 65-year-olds who are writing Business Insider, and there are not many 15 and 16-year-old developers who are writing these publications. So it's almost like, if you don't have anything like kind of impressive social proof to comment on, think about maybe maybe you were once a founder was once homeless, and that's something they can highlight that can kind of make the story particularly interesting.
Well, every episode I ask my guests at the end of the lightning round, what if there's something about them that most people don't know, and that has often brought out so many interesting stories and shown that person in such a different light, that I think that using or thinking about it that way, it doesn't necessarily have to be, as you said, these credentials or the big companies you worked at. But what is something about you as a person that people would talk about anyway, right? And then
Absolutely.
can you kind of integrate that into the story? Okay, so figuring out the announcement is step one, and then we go on to step two. What does that involve?
Step two is adding the social proof into this. And step three is making the mission much bigger. So usually what I like to say is a lot of founders, they'll just talk about what their product is today. And the reality is most products today aren't particularly interesting when they're first getting launched. Twitter wasn't that fantastic. Facebook was pretty basic as well. But what is really interesting is, where does the founder want to take it in 3 or 5 years? So usually what I ask is, do you know when you're about to fall asleep, or you're in the gym and you're daydreaming about how big your company is going to be, and and you're like, hey, in 3 years we're going to have 100 employees and we're going to be taking over the world, right? Whatever that mission is, like, talk about that and highlight that in your email and press release to a journalist. And a specific example of that is, I co-founded a co-working space in Medellin, in South America, and we were featured in TechCrunch, BBC, Financial Times, like most of the biggest publications. And there was really no reason for that, because a co-working space isn't that interesting, right? It's office space, and there are hundreds being started, every month around the world. But the reason why I was featured in all these publications was the story that I pitched wasn't the launch of a co-working space. The story was, we want to turn this city into the Silicon Valley of Latin America. I would always just emphasize to everyone, look for that kind of big story, because that's what I think journalists are more interested in.
I want to go back to the first two steps, because I just want to be clear about this. So when you said social proof, which part of the conversation was that about? Was that really about the founder story? Is that what you were talking about there?
Yeah, primarily the founder story. I would say as a company grows, it could be about the founding team or the executive team.
Okay, got it. So step one is the specific announcement about the product. Step two is the social proof around the founders or the founding team. And then step three is the mission.
Exactly. And what an entrepreneur is going to do, let's say, launching a SaaS business, is they're going to communicate to the media this specific announcement via an email. In general, I like to attach a press release onto that. And it's important. The reason why I mentioned the social proof and the bigger mission is you really want to lead with that. If a founder could say like, "Hi, Anthony," and I can actually send you an exact email of coverage that we've gotten on TechCrunch in these different companies.
That would be great.
I'm happy to. It would say something like, "Hi, Anthony. This is John. I'm a PhD from Stanford that is about to launch this new SaaS business that is, aiming to kind of the big mission of that specific company." That's why, and you'll see in the emails that how it's structured there. But it's really important to kind of lead with all that information, as opposed to a lot of founders won't even include that in there. Okay.
Well, what's a typical mistake that you see with that? Because when you talk about the mission, I don't know. To me, it seems like, I could say, "Hey, I'm kind of launching this SaaS product, and today I have no funding and no customers, and in the next 12 months, I'm going to turn this into $1 billion business." Mm-hmm. Right? It's not going to happen.
Well, so I'll give an example though. So I was talking to these two founders, and they had this. It was a Google Chrome plugin, and to help basically translate, help people translate words online from like English to Spanish and Spanish to basically help people learn languages, right? But it's pretty basic. And at the very end, they mentioned to me, "Oh, I don't know if this is even relevant that we should include this, but we're both Stanford PhDs." And I said, even include this, we have to lead with this. And as opposed to talking about what the product is today, which is a Google Chrome, like kind of a browser plugin, the story was these two Stanford PhD founders have spent 2 years building this company that wants to change the way people learn languages online. So that's really what we led with. And then after we said, "Hey, we're starting off with this Google Chrome plugin, and then we plan to go into these, create these other products to kind of better fulfill the mission as well." But so you can see that by kind of changing the viewpoint of that, you can look at it as this product that, there are kind of a lot of different ways you can view a very similar story. I hope, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I understand that. I think I still kind of wonder about the mission in terms of, I think you kind of have a creative license there to maybe just, maybe come up with something where somebody at TechCrunch is going to sort of look at it and roll their eyes and say, "Yeah, right, you're going to do that." How do you sort of, what's the best way to frame it in a way that people are going to think that is believable?
Yeah, well, so I'll give, let's say, your background as an example. Let's say you, as opposed to saying "Hi, my name's Omer, and I want to build this $1 billion company." I would say something like, "Hi, my name is Omer. I'm a former Microsoft employee, and I left because I'm about to launch this SaaS company, and the goal of this is to change, and kind of go into the main mission of the company, and then and usually below that you would talk more about the specifics of the individual product, but that would be an example of okay, well now you have that social proof because, hey, this person used to work at Microsoft, so he's probably bright and he's probably hardworking. And hey, that mission of the company sounds pretty interesting. I'm gonna learn more about it.
Okay.
So,
all right.
I wouldn't say, and the social proof matters a lot because, like Publicize, when we were featured on TechCrunch, it wouldn't have mattered if I was just a random, someone just graduated from university without any experience. But the reason why it was more legitimate was because, hey, this person's a global mentor of 500 startups. Hey, he used to write for VentureBeat. He has that background. And so I would look, like for you have a fantastic background as well, formerly of Microsoft, all these things. And I think most founders as well have that. They just don't highlight it in the very beginning.
Yeah, but what if I didn't? What if I didn't work at Microsoft? What if I'd worked somewhere else that nobody had ever heard of?
Yeah. Well, so then what I would do is try to highlight these other things that might be particularly interesting about yourself. So, the company of the 65-year-old that we'd helped is from Safely Filed, and the big pitch about that was kind of the story wasn't necessarily about the product. It was about, hey, here are these two 60-plus-year-old founders doing something really interesting. So then it would be kind of a different angle there.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. All right. So that was step 3. And what is step 4?
Yeah. Step 4 is, okay, so you are going to email, email this specific announcement that has this social proof and the big mission to these journalists. How do you go about doing that? So there are basically 2 ways to contact the media: an exclusive and an embargo. And I'll kind of explain the reasoning. So when we launched the co-working space and we got on TechCrunch, I emailed the Next Web the next day, another popular tech publication. And the journalist wrote me and said, hey, we would have covered this, but TechCrunch already covered it. It's kind of old news. Let me know when you have the next announcement. And new media publications compete with one another to try to break stories. And so this is a big challenge that an entrepreneur has, right? When you're about to launch and you think, how can I get all these companies to basically publish the story at basically the same time so no one breaks the story? So entrepreneurs, if they decide to go with an embargo, would email, let's say, 25 publications. And they would say, hey, I'm about to launch this sauce product. That's the announcement. Would you like to cover it? If you would like to, you have to agree to this embargo, which basically means you won't publish the story before, let's say, 12 o'clock next Wednesday. So ideally at 12 o'clock next Wednesday, 5 publications cover the announcement, and it's a big win for your company. So the challenge that you have with the embargo is that, and you see actually this happen a lot with Apple, or let's say the president makes an announcement and, a dozen publications all cover it at 12 o'clock. Like, how is it possible that they all had timed it, that they could write a story that quickly right after the announcement? Mm-hmm. So the challenge that an entrepreneur has, especially that doesn't have prior success to stand on, is if a TechCrunch writer is getting 1,000 emails every day and covering 5 stories, it's hard for them to agree to this embargo when, hey, you're not Elon Musk type of thing, or not yet. So what
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say the other option is to offer an exclusive. So basically, what you would do is email an individual writer at let's say Business Insider and say, would you like first right to publish this story? And by doing that, that's a really effective way that maybe you don't know a journalist, that you can kind of stand out from the crowd.
Got it. Yeah. No, I was wondering, how do you know who to contact at these publications?
I think the easiest thing is if let's say you're set on getting covered on TechCrunch, you can Google search techcrunch.com sauce, and you have a sauce business, and you could see really quickly kind of prior stories that these writers have contacted. And one of the things to keep in mind is not only contacting the writers, but also the tips at emails. So at VentureBeat back in the day, about half our stories every day were written about people who pitch stories to tips at venturebeat.com. So those emails are read every day. So just something for founders to think about.
Okay. If I was contacting a publication like TechCrunch, and maybe I find 3 writers that all write about SaaS products, would I send emails to all of them?
Yeah. So here's the thing about the exclusive. So let's say you decide to do an exclusive. The challenge with the exclusive is that you can't offer it to multiple publications at the same time. So sorry, and I'm going to make sure to answer your question, but because let's say you say, hey, I'm about to launch this sauce product, and you offer an exclusive to TechCrunch and VentureBeat, and they both come back to you and say, hey, we're interested in covering the story. Well, then it's no longer an exclusive, right? You have to choose one, and you'll get blacklisted really quickly by that publication. So what I would recommend doing is on Monday, you'd email a journalist, and in the email, let them know, hey, this exclusive is available, for the next 24 hours, and you should send one follow-up. But if you haven't heard back, then you could email another writer.
Okay. So you mentioned that in addition to the email, you also would attach a press release with it.
Yeah. And I'm happy to send an example press release as well, so people can see how it's looked at. 2 things that are really important to note about the press release. It's hard for the general public to read because that's not the audience it's meant for. So a lot of people, when they first read a press release, it almost reads like a novel, and it shouldn't. The goal is basically to provide as much information as possible for journalists to then, take and then, add into an article however they wish. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. And there's a specific format, but probably the easiest way to model that format is to look at an existing press release. And the second thing to keep in mind is a big misconception about press releases is people think that is what will sell a journalist on the story. And that's not what its purpose is. So a journalist would never look at PR Web, and I think would very rarely ever look at PR Web and say, hey, this story sounds really interesting from this press release. I'm going to reach out. What really will sell a journalist on covering the story is the email that you send. And then the goal of the press release is basically to reduce the amount of friction to write the article as possible. So most journalists, they'll know when you pitch them on a story, hey, is this article going to take me 25 minutes to write, or is it going to take me 5 hours to do all this research? So the goal with the press release is if you know, hey, I'm targeting this really big market with my sauce company, and I'm going to add all those data points in the press release, because as opposed to a journalist having to look up all this himself, they can just refer to the press release that already has it in there. It's basically you're just reducing the friction and the time it's going to need for them to write an article.
Okay. So you got it. So it's kind of like how do you make it as easy as possible for them to, if they sense some interest in the story, how do you make it as easy as possible for them to be able to write that piece and get it published without having to waste hours going and figuring out more about your product and you?
Yeah, 100%. And one of the things to keep in mind is a lot of writers are paid per article too. So it makes even more of a difference. So that's why it's just important to be as proactive as possible, because somebody is going to have to do that research. It's either going to be you or it's going to be the journalist on their own time.
Now, how does this fit into what some people do where, you get a press release written up and then you use sites like PR Web to distribute the press release? Yeah. We wouldn't be doing that in this sense, right? I mean, you wouldn't be sending out a press, you wouldn't be making that public. So are you writing the press release just for the eyes of the writers at these publications? Yeah.
So now a lot of it's going to kind of tie together. And so there are a lot of misconceptions about those PR syndication sites. So when you do the press release, when you write the press release, it can later be syndicated on PR Web, et cetera. But you don't want it to be public yet. And in regards to those syndication sites like Business Wire and PR Web, so some of the misunderstanding about that is, let's say you syndicate it on PR Web and it gets on Yahoo Finance. Like that's not on kind of the homepage of Yahoo Finance where that's read. That's almost, we call it the graveyard of the web, where it'll be indexed by Google, but very, very few people will read it. And I think the goal I look at PR is how do you get on the front page of Wall Street Journal, on the front page of TechCrunch, where people are really reading those articles. The reason why you should send out the press release, get the article covered, and then syndicate the press release is it's all about timing. So let's say you write this press release and you syndicate it online, and then you email a journalist 2 days later and say, do you want to cover the story? They're going to Google search it and they're going to say, hey, I would have covered this, but 2 days ago you syndicated this press release, so it's already old news.
And it's already available on like 1,000 sites or something, depending on how you syndicated it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they no longer want to cover it. Which is why you should aim. As a general rule, what I recommend is if it's below a seed round of funding. So let's say one or below less than 1.5 million in funding, offered as an exclusive, and then once it's published by a leading publication, further coverage, and then you can syndicate the press release.
Okay. And so once it's published, any sort of the same day, it would be fine to go and syndicate the press release. Yeah.
And one thing that's important, and you can actually see this a lot with Publicize, because everything I'm saying is like what I do myself. Like you can see, hey, when Publicize launched, we got on TechCrunch. That was the exclusive. A few days later, we got on Forbes. That was when we furthered coverage. And so it's not that other publications won't necessarily cover you if you've already been covered before. It's just something to kind of keep in mind. Usually in the email, I like to mention, hey, we were already covered by this site, but I'm happy to, provide additional information for a new story. And the syndication, I think a lot of people will use PR Web or Business Wire, let's say for search reasons to make sure that they're indexed online. But if people are expecting that, they're going to get several thousand visits from syndicating a press release, I mean, that won't happen. But just for something for people to keep in mind.
Got it. Okay. And so step 5 is Is what?
So yeah, step 5 is so just to go over the first 4 again. So people are going to come up with a specific announcement. So they're launching their sauce business. They're going to add social proof, step number 2. They're going to make the mission as big as possible, and they're going to formulate this into an email and a press release. And then if it's a launch, which is, let's say, a smaller announcement than a big round of funding, let's say they're going to offer it as an exclusive to, let's say, TechCrunch. TechCrunch calls them. They say, hey, we want to have a phone interview. They bring the story online. The founder will email other publications to further coverage, and which is step 4. And the 5th one is to repeat the process. So a big thing about PR is I think people think like, hey, we're going to make this announcement and we're going to just get a ton of coverage after 1 month and we're just going to stop. And PR really compounds over time. So I think the strongest companies every 8 to 10 weeks will have these different announcements. And maybe 1 month we'll aim for an exclusive on TechCrunch. Maybe they announce a milestone and they aim for an exclusive on VentureBeat. And over time, I think the benefits of PR isn't just with social proof and new visits. I actually think of it as kind of a secret weapon for SEO, just because these sites are such high page rank sites linking to companies. So yeah, the idea is that it will kind of compound over time. Can I talk really quickly about just the exclusive and furthering coverage? Because I think there's sometimes confusion with that.
Sure.
So let's say you're launching this sauce company and you get it on TechCrunch. Well, who do you email after? And it's important that you email the most time-sensitive to the least time-sensitive publications after. So the most time-sensitive in general are tech publications, because if you email them 24 hours later, it might already be old news. So you want to email, the Next Web, Tech Cocktail, all of these other publications. And there are many. And then you go to more mainstream publications. So let's say a publication like Time Magazine, Forbes, for example, Fast Company, Inc. They're less time sensitive. So you can email them, let's say 2 or 3 days after the announcement comes online. And if it's an interesting story, they'll still cover it, even though TechCrunch already covered the story.
Let me just make sure I understood this. So we're saying that there are 2 possible approaches to work with when you're doing PR. One is to either offer an exclusive. The other is to have some kind of embargo where everybody has to commit to not publishing any story until a certain date. And that probably doesn't work if you're at the early stages of a startup. So focus on the exclusive. Absolutely. And if you're going down that road, whoever has agreed to the exclusive story, once they've published, then you have the opportunity then to follow up with other time-sensitive publications and try to get additional coverage there before you go to some of these other publications like Forbes or Fast Company who might be okay still covering the story a month later.
Absolutely. And part of it is just the nature, like new media, I think they care more about they're more time sensitive, as opposed to a lot of these, publications, historically they were monthly magazines. So they just are less time sensitive. And then the third, the least time sensitive, tend to be industry verticals. So let's say you have a sports app and you get it featured on TechCrunch. Well, or a health app. There are all these publications in the sports industry and the health industry that are probably even much larger than the largest technology publications. So it's important to email them as well. And they tend to be the least time sensitive in that group. But PR, I think, is different than a lot of marketing channels because to me, when I think about social media or content marketing, it's really kind of consistency over time. I think PR look at it more as, hey, within this 2 to 3 week period, it's going to be super intense because you have to email all these publications before basically the story gets old, and there's so many that you can cover. And then usually there's like a kind of a rest period for you to prepare for the next announcement.
Got it. Okay. This is really an ongoing process, right? This never really stops. Obviously, you want to try and time your efforts with something, going back to step 1, having some specific announcement to talk about. But this is just ongoing, I assume. You have to continue this cycle and sort of go through those steps consistently.
I think the most effective companies, it is a continuous cycle. And one of the things to keep in mind, you asked before about the big mistakes people make, and I see this a lot. So we work with, I guess, over a dozen Y Combinator startups, and a big mistake they make is that they combine announcements. So as an example, they'll say, hey, let's say it's a sauce Y Combinator startup. They say, we're going to launch and we just raised 1.5 million in funding, and they announce both in the same article. When you think about it, that's really hurting. They're not optimizing PR. What they should do is month one, announce their launch, and then month three, announce their funding, and they'll basically double the amount of PR coverage they get. So something to keep in mind for a lot of founders is like you can kind of strategize ahead of time and say, okay, well, this next year we have these 5 to 6 big announcements. Let's kind of break them up. And the big thing about it is a lot of founders, let's say they raised funding 6 months ago and they just haven't announced it. They can still announce that. They don't, because it hasn't come online yet.
Got it. Now, if somebody didn't want to do all of this and they just wanted to work with your company to do this, how does that process work? Do you guys like sync up every month and sort of say, okay, well, what's the plan for this month and here's how we're going to tackle that? Or
yeah, everything that I mentioned that people should do, we do it all for clients. And we have like several calls throughout the month. And in general, it's probably about a 6 to 8 week process for each announcement. And yeah, we handle all of that. But companies can do it themselves. So it just kind of depends on the founder and their background and their preferences, really.
Yeah, I think this is great what you've shared here, and thank you for doing that. And I think that if somebody is at the very early stages of a startup, doing this themselves can really be a cost-effective way to try and get some PR. But I think that over time, as the business starts to grow and you start to get more customers, you're going to get to a point where you really have to ask yourself, how much of my time do I want to spend doing PR or using that time to build a better product for my customers or acquiring more customers or whatever it is. So I think there's a natural point for every startup at some point where it would make sense for them to at least have somebody doing this for them and who can do it probably a lot more efficiently than they could.
Yeah, absolutely. And sorry, just two last things that I think mistakes that I've seen founders make. Let's say that your hope is to get a response rate of 20 or 30%, because journalists are just bombarded with emails every day. A lot of founders I see will email 2 people and not get a response and say, oh, something's super, when they're doing it by themselves, and then they'll stop. And it is important to email, a certain number of publications to get a good response. And there's so many cases where we've worked with the client and they have a smaller announcement. And let's say the Next Web says they're not interested and VentureBeat says they're not interested. And then the Wall Street Journal says they are interested and they cover it, which doesn't make sense necessarily because Wall Street Journal should be the most competitive. But it's just keeping your goal. You can never guarantee anything, but your goal is to kind of maximize your probability as much as possible. And I think the second thing is that to always remember to send at least one follow-up email. So the follow-up email I like to say is hi, Sarah, I hope all's well. I wanted to send a quick follow-up. I know you're really busy if you don't have the chance to respond. Cheers, Conrad. And just a specific example, when we launched a Reporter in Residence program, I remember we got on, I think it was TechCrunch and Forbes, and I'd emailed 15 publications after. I forgot the exact number, but I think one of them had responded, and I sent one follow-up the next day, and almost all of them responded to that follow-up. So it's just important to remember that for a lot of these journalists who are getting 500 emails every day, they might really be interested in something, but they just, I'm sure you see what happens when you just get too many emails and things get lost. But on the other hand, I like to say as a general rule, at least one follow-up, but don't take it too far because, it's really easy to send 10 follow-ups and I think it can get on people's nerves.
Yeah. All right, cool. All right, it's time for our lightning round. I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and I'd like you to answer them as quickly as you can. You ready?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
What's the best piece of business advice that you ever received?
So much advice. I think one of them was to not worry about scaling, but to focus just on adding as much value as possible. Because if you're able to add enough value as much value as possible and solve a real problem, you will be able to find ways to scale it at a later time.
What book would you recommend to our audience and why?
There's so many good ones. I love 0 to 1. I love Give and Take as well. I saw someone else had recommend The Hard Things About Hard Things. There's so many. But yeah, those 3 really stand out to me.
What's one attribute or characteristic in your mind of a successful entrepreneur?
I'd say to me, the most successful entrepreneurs seek negative feedback. So it's really easy for founders to kind of ignore the negative feedback. And I usually, like, I have kind of my on my team or my group of friends. I usually, when I talk about an idea, I don't even really listen to why they like the idea. I say, like, no, specifically, what do you not like about the idea? Because I think you're going to find a lot more insight into that.
Yeah, I agree with that. What's your favorite personal productivity tool or habit?
I would say habit. It's just being really attuned to kind of my energy throughout the day, because like I just find myself to be much more productive during certain times, and other times, as much as I try to force myself, I know I'm just not going to be very productive. So I would say the biggest habit is just being kind of attuned to my own kind of personal energy.
What's a new business idea or a crazy idea that you have in your head you'd love to pursue if you had the extra time?
I mean, the more I get into Publicize, just the more challenges there are in it to kind of solve. So I really haven't thought about kind of new startups that I want to do, but it would have to be something that, like, specific problems. There would have to be like a big founder market fit. So, like, why am I the right person to solve this? So it would probably have to do with something like people who are traveling and working, and kind of something in that kind of international market that I would be the right person to solve, as opposed to someone else in Silicon Valley or New York.
What's an interesting or fun fact about you that most people don't know?
Let me see. I think one thing is I make a point to travel at least one weekend of the month. So that could be to a new city, or that could be to kind of international somewhere.
1 week every month?
One weekend.
Oh, one weekend every month.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. I was going to say, wow, life is good, man. All right. And finally, what is one of your most important passions outside of your work?
You see, every, I would say 6 months, I try something new. So earlier it was salsa, now it's jujitsu. And I think probably next will be probably something to do with like yoga, I think. That'll be the next.
Very cool. Conrad, it's been a pleasure chatting. Thank you for sharing your experience and advice with us and helping us walk through the process of doing cost-effective PR. I think that's going to be really valuable for people. Now, if people want to get in touch with you or find out more about Publicize, what's the best way for them to do that?
I think our URL is publicize.co. I love connecting with people on LinkedIn, and my email is just conrad@publicize.co.
Awesome. Conrad, thanks again. I wish you all the best.
Omar, thanks so much for having me.
Take care. All right. I hope you enjoyed this episode. You can get to the show notes by going to conversionaid.com/99, where you'll find all the links and resources we discussed today. If you'd like to get in touch with me, you can email me at Omer, O-M-E-R, @conversionaid.com, or you can find me on Twitter at Omer Khan, O-M-E-R-K-H-A-N. Thanks for listening. Until next time, take care.
Thanks for listening to Conversion Aid, the podcast that shows you how to take your business to the next level and create software that sells. But things don't have to end here. Head over to conversionaid.com/VIP and get yourself on the free VIP list, where we share special insider content and news about upcoming episodes. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you next time.